Chapter 1. You again? At table 9? The vineyard shimmered in the late afternoon sun, rows of ripe grapes stretching into the distance like something off a postcard. String lights hung above the courtyard, unlit for now, but promising their soft glow as the sun dipped low. The smell of citrus blossom mingled with freshly popped champagne and the slightly sweet tang of the buttercream frosting being piped onto a towering cake nearby. Anthony adjusted the cuff of his slate-gray suit jacket and took a sip from his glass, already halfway through his first pour of the night. The bubbles fizzed gently on his tongue, but he wasn't drinking for the taste. Weddings had started to blur together lately, like someone pressed replay on the same song and hoped he wouldn't notice the pattern. Same color schemes, same teary-eyed toasts, same napkins folded like swans. And of course, the same singles table. He eyed the small placard tucked into a vintage wine cork beside his plate. Table 9. Great, the one closest to the restrooms and the farthest from any sign of emotional stability. Anthony let out a sigh and leaned back in the white wooden chair, tipping it slightly on two legs. The lawn stretched behind him, dotted with white umbrellas and scattered rose petals. Perfect day for a wedding. Perfect day for someone else's happy ending. Let me guess, came a familiar voice behind him, rich with amusement. Table 9 again? Anthony nearly choked on his champagne. He didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. That voice had a permanent lease in the back of his brain. Ezra, he said flatly, rolling his eyes as he turned. Tell me you're here to spike the punch and stage a revolution against love. Ezra grinned, slow and knowing. His black curls were a little longer than the last time Anthony saw him, just brushing the collar of a tailored dark green shirt that clung a little too perfectly to his lean frame. He had a white rose tucked into the lapel of his jacket, no doubt his own work. I was going to behave, Ezra said, walking over and plopping into the empty chair beside him. But now that I know you're here, I'll probably start a food fight, just to keep things interesting. Anthony chuckled despite himself. Of course you will. They clinked glasses, Ezra with something amber and dangerous in his tumbler. Bourbon, probably. The man had taste, annoyingly good taste. Anthony tried not to notice the gold glint of the sun on Ezra's skin or the way his smile slanted slightly to one side, like it was always halfway to a secret. They'd met years ago at a wedding for two mutual friends neither of them particularly liked. Since then, fate, or some vindictive wedding planner, had made sure their paths crossed again, and again, and again. So, Ezra said, propping his chin on his palm and gazing at Anthony with mock-serious intensity, still single? Still bitter? Still pretending you're above it all? I don't pretend, Anthony replied dryly. I am above it all. Ezra laughed. Sure. That's why you're sipping champagne alone at the singles corner of sadness. Anthony gestured broadly at the table. Hey, this is prime real estate. Great view of the exit and absolutely no pressure to catch the bouquet. Speaking of, Ezra said, leaning in, remind me to duck when they throw it. I almost got a black eye at the last one. I still think you threw a shoulder into that bridesmaid. Look, she was aggressive and I was cornered. They shared a look, then burst out laughing. By the time the ceremony began, they'd already taken over their end of the table. The other guests, an older divorcee trying to set her daughter up, and a painfully shy guy who'd brought a Dungeons & Dragons manual as light reading, were of little threat to their bubble of chaotic comfort. Ezra passed Anthony a bread roll without asking. Anthony stole Ezra's butter without apologizing. They moved like people who'd done this before. And maybe, in some way, they had. The wedding was beautiful. Of course it was. Draped in warm pinks and creams, with crystal vases lining every table and string quartets humming beneath the vows. Ezra's floral arrangements were all over the place, cascading garlands, tucked petals on every table, the occasional dramatic wildflower crown. Anthony knew his work by now. Clean, bold, a little unpredictable. You've got a thing for eucalyptus lately, Anthony murmured during dinner, pointing at the sprig near his wine glass. Ezra smirked. It adds drama. You are drama. Pot, meet kettle. The teasing didn't stop there. At the cake cutting, Anthony ended up with a dab of frosting on his cheek, and before he could wipe it away, Ezra reached out with a thumb, brushing it off with a smirk that made Anthony's stomach flip. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, the casual intimacy of it, or how much he liked it. You missed a spot, Ezra murmured, and Anthony's heart tripped over itself. The night spiraled in the way weddings always did. Open bar, bad dancing, someone crying in the bathroom. Anthony and Ezra ended up outside after the DJ started playing Shut Up and Dance for the third time. They'd kicked off their shoes and were sitting on the edge of a stone planter, feet dangling, half a bottle of champagne between them. The vineyard stretched into the dusk like a promise, silent, golden, endless. "This is nice," Anthony admitted, stretching his legs out. Ezra hummed in agreement. Better than dancing with strangers. Better than fake laughing at speeches. They lapsed into a soft quiet, the kind that never felt awkward with Ezra. Anthony broke it with a sigh. "You ever think we're just cursed to keep showing up to these things alone?" Ezra swirled the last of his drink, then looked over with a crooked smile. "Maybe." He paused, then added more lightly, "We should make a pact." Anthony raised a brow. "Oh God, are we doing this?" Ezra nodded solemnly. "If we're still single next wedding season, we just go together, as each other's committed plus ones." Anthony stared at him, expression unreadable, like, "No dating anyone else?" "No. I just mean, we stop doing this alone. We show up together. No questions, no explanations. Let people think what they want." Anthony leaned back on his elbows, gazing at the sky, then sideways at Ezra. "What if people start assuming things?" Ezra met his gaze. Let them. There it was again, that simmer. The one they always danced around like it might burn if they got too close. Anthony didn't answer right away, but after a beat, he stuck out his hand. "Deal." Ezra took it. His grip was warm. His thumb brushed over Anthony's knuckles, slow and deliberate. And for once, Anthony didn't pull away. Chapter 2, I brought a plus one. He's a menace. The scent of salt water clung to the breeze as Anthony stepped out of the rented Jeep and immediately regretted not wearing sunscreen. The coastal sun had no mercy, and the beach was already humming with the kind of chaotic, pre-wedding energy that promised drama, sand in uncomfortable places, and at least one person crying before cake. Beside him, Ezra stretched with all the lazy grace of a cat just waking from a nap. He wore sunglasses far too expensive for someone who swore he didn't believe in design or anything, and a sleeveless black tank top that made him look more like a rock star crashing the party than a wedding guest. The tank clung to his toned arms and sun-kissed skin in a way Anthony tried, unsuccessfully, not to notice. "Tell me you at least brought the shirt," Anthony muttered, slamming the Jeep door shut. Ezra gave him a dazzling grin. "Define brought." "You're not seriously attending a wedding like that." "Oh, I am. I'm a minimalist. I believe in packing light." "You're a menace." "And yet," Ezra said, slinging an arm around Anthony's shoulders, "you brought me anyway." Anthony grumbled but didn't shrug him off. Their pact was simple. If they were still single, they'd be each other's plus ones. No questions, no judgment, just company and a mutual buffer against the cringe of being pitied for showing up alone. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the sleeveless tank. Maybe it was the fact that this wedding mashed together their worlds. Ezra's old college friend Rachel and Anthony's co-worker Devin had fallen in love at a charity wine auction, and now, somehow, the two circles were merging into one boozy, sunburned, barefoot union. Ezra's floral arrangements were already lining the bamboo arch where the ceremony would take place, all wildflowers and tropical blooms. A chaotic, messy kind of beauty that suited the couple perfectly. "Anthony," a voice called. Trina, bold lipstick, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of energy that could start a flash mob at a funeral, hurled herself into his arms. "And Ezra, my God, are you guys like finally?" "Nope," Anthony said, already steering them toward the seating chart taped to a seashell-studded board. "Still just two sad single men avoiding therapy." "Lies," Trina said, winking at Ezra. "Y'all are giving off major just wait till the honeymoon vibes." Ezra chuckled, accepting a mimosa from a passing waiter and clinking it lightly against Anthony's coffee. "She's not entirely wrong." "Behave," Anthony warned under his breath, heat rising to his cheeks. Ezra just gave him that look, the one that said he never planned to. As the ceremony started, the two of them stood in the back row, toes in the sand, shoulders brushing. Rachel looked radiant in a backless ivory gown, Devin beamed like he'd won the lottery, and the vows were heartfelt enough to make someone's uncle sob behind them. Still, Anthony couldn't fully focus. Ezra was too close. Too warm. too easy to lean into. And then came the bouquet toss. Go! Trina shoved Anthony forward with far too much force for a woman in heels. Anthony stumbled directly into the cluster of waiting singles, and the damn bouquet practically dove into his arms like it had a personal vendetta. He caught it with startled grace and immediate horror. "Oh no," he muttered. "Oh yes!" Trina screamed. Ezra howled with laughter, doubled over on the sand. "I'm framing this moment." Without thinking, Anthony jogged toward the water and shoved the bouquet into the nearest patch of wet sand. "Hide the evidence," he grumbled. "Too late," Ezra called. "You're cursed with romance now." A volleyball net went up soon after, and Anthony should have declined the invite. But Ezra challenged him with a raised brow and a cocky smirk, and that was always Anthony's weakness. The game was a blur of laughter, competitive shouting, and more than one argument over who had better abs. Ezra won by distraction tactics. But the moment that froze in Anthony's mind came when a stray ball sent Ezra diving across the sand, straight into him. They collapsed in a tangled heap, Ezra landing squarely on top of Anthony, one hand braced near his head, the other on Anthony's chest. "Hey there," Ezra breathed, eyes locked on his. Their laughter died down slowly. Neither moved. The heat of the sun had nothing on the burn traveling down Anthony's spine. "Comfortable?" Anthony asked, voice low. Ezra's smile softened. "Always." Then Trina yelled, "Kiss him already!" and they both burst out laughing, rolling apart. Later, in the reception tent, strings of lanterns swayed in the wind. The dance floor thumped with music, and Anthony nursed his third glass of wine. He'd lost count of how many people winked at them, assuming they were together. One woman asked how long they'd been dating. Ezra said, "Feels like forever," with a grin. Anthony didn't correct him. Their hotel was a 5-minute walk down the shore. As they stumbled into the lobby, sand still stuck to their ankles and their jackets slung over their shoulders, the desk clerk smiled knowingly. "One bed, right?" she said. Ezra didn't even blink. Of course. The room was small but clean. Ocean view, balcony, one very large bed. Anthony eyed it like it was a trap. "Don't worry," Ezra said, pulling his shirt over his head, revealing a lean torso with ink peeking out near his ribs. "I don't snore." "That's not what I'm worried about," Anthony muttered, changing into a worn t-shirt and soft gray sweatpants. They crawled into bed without turning on the TV, without pretending they weren't both thinking far too loudly. Ezra lay on his back, arms behind his head. "You think we're cursed?" "To be single?" Anthony asked, turning to face him. "To pretend weddings don't make us feel like shit." Anthony sighed. "I don't know. It's easier to laugh at it, right? Crack a few jokes, drink too much wine, catch a bouquet, and bury it like a time capsule." Ezra turned toward him, his face inches away now in the soft dark. "You ever feel like it's all happening without you? Like you're on the guest list but never in the main act?" Anthony swallowed. "Yeah, all the time." Ezra's voice dropped. "That's why I hate bringing dates." Anthony raised a brow. "You hate dates?" "I hate pretending it's enough. That sitting across from someone and talking about dogs or taxes or favorite cities will somehow make me feel like I belong at a wedding." Anthony stared at him, trying to piece it together. The confident Ezra he knew never sounded like this, soft and unsure. "I get it," he said finally. "I think I've been playing the game so long, I forgot what it's like to want something real." They lay there in silence, the only sound the faint crash of waves beyond the balcony door. Then Anthony, quieter than before, said, "I didn't expect to like being your plus one so much." Ezra turned his head slightly. "Yeah? Yeah?" "Yeah." Ezra smiled in the dark. Anthony fell asleep facing him. Ezra stayed awake a few minutes longer, eyes tracing the relaxed line of Anthony's brow, the way his lashes rested softly against his cheek, the shape of his lips even in sleep. He reached up just once and brushed a piece of hair from Anthony's forehead. Then he turned off the light. Chapter 3. It wasn't jealousy. It was... okay, maybe it was jealousy. The city skyline shimmered behind the rooftop arch like something cinematic, golden hour light reflecting off glass towers, soft music drifting through the air, and champagne flutes catching the last flickers of sun. If weddings were a drug, this one was the high. Anthony stood near the bar, in a fitted black suit, top button undone, nursing a drink that had long since stopped being cold. He wasn't really listening to the conversation around him. He was watching Ezra. And Ezra was laughing. With someone else. A groomsman, tall, tan, annoyingly charming in a navy blue tux that looked like it had been tailored just for his damn shoulders. He was leaning just a little too close to Ezra, who looked dangerously good in a deep maroon shirt that contrasted beautifully with his sun-warmed skin and wild curls tied back with a loose black ribbon. They looked like they belonged in a fashion spread. They looked like a couple. And Anthony didn't like that. He told himself he didn't care. This was their third wedding together since the Pact. This was just part of the fun. They were friends. Friends with complicated undercurrents. A few shared beds, a lot of teasing, but no labels. Still, when Ezra laughed, tilted his head back, and let out one of those low, real laughs, Anthony felt something coil tight in his chest. It wasn't just annoyance. It wasn't just discomfort. Okay, it was jealousy. "Need a refill?" a voice asked. Anthony turned to find Michelle, his coworker's date, smiling and motioning toward his nearly empty glass. "You look like you're about to eat someone alive." Anthony blinked. "Is it that obvious?" Michelle laughed. "Only because I just watched you glare at my brother like he keyed your car." "Wait, brother?" Anthony looked back at the groomsman. "That's your brother?" "Yeah, Gavin. He flirts with anything that breathes, but doesn't actually bite." Anthony cracked a smile despite himself. "Good to know." "Want to dance?" she asked, shrugging. "You look like you could use a distraction." He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Michelle pulled him onto the dance floor with ease. The music shifted to something upbeat, jazzy, energetic. And for a few minutes, Anthony let himself get lost in the rhythm, the laughter, the not watching Ezra part of the night. Until he felt eyes on him. He turned and locked eyes with Ezra across the rooftop. Ezra stood near the edge of the terrace, drink in hand, conversation forgotten. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze didn't waver. Not when Michelle leaned in. Not when Anthony laughed at something she said. Not even when the music slowed and Anthony instinctively rested a hand on her waist. It hit Ezra like a gut punch. He wasn't used to this, to caring, to feeling that sharp, cutting edge of jealousy, the kind that didn't just burn, but also whispered that maybe Anthony didn't see this as something real. Ezra finished his drink in one long swallow and slipped away from the crowd. Later, much later, after the cake had been cut, the bouquet caught by a child who immediately traded it for chocolate, and the slow dances had begun to blur together, Anthony found him again. Ezra was standing by the edge of the rooftop, leaning on the stone railing, the city lights stretching behind him like stars that had fallen too far. Anthony joined him without a word, handing him a fresh drink. Ezra took it silently. They stood there for a moment, side by side, close but not touching. "You disappeared," Anthony said. Ezra's voice was low. "So did you." Anthony looked at him. "You okay?" Ezra didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "I didn't think it would bother me." "What?" Ezra turned to face him fully. "Watching you out there, laughing, dancing, like this is just a game to you." Anthony's brow furrowed. "It's not, isn't it?" Ezra challenged. "We made a pact, Anthony. A joke, a way to avoid being the sad single guys at weddings." Anthony's jaw tensed. "You're the one who said, let them think what they want." "I didn't think it'd start feeling real." The words slipped out, raw and sharp. Anthony's heart skipped. Ezra continued, voice quieter now. "If we're just pretending, why does it feel like more?" Anthony stepped closer. The space between them charged now, pulsing with something unspoken. "Because," he said, voice rough, "maybe it is." Ezra blinked, caught off guard. And then Anthony kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't planned. It was urgent, like a spark finally given fuel. Ezra's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered at their feet, but neither flinched. Their mouths met like they'd been orbiting this moment for far too long, like gravity had stopped waiting for permission. Anthony's hands found Ezra's face, pulling him closer. Ezra's fingers curled into Anthony's jacket, anchoring him like he was afraid the rooftop might fall away beneath them. The kiss was messy and breathless and so honest it almost hurt. When they pulled apart, both of them stared, stunned, lips red, chests rising unevenly. Neither said a word. They didn't have to. Back at the hotel, their room was colder than expected, the air conditioner set too low. Or maybe that was just the tension, lingering and thick in the air. They changed in silence. Anthony in a black t-shirt and boxers, Ezra in a threadbare tank and soft flannel sleep pants. They climbed into bed like strangers. like two men suddenly afraid of the space they'd been so comfortable in just last night. They lay with their backs to each other, the city lights blinking faintly through the curtains. Neither of them could sleep. Anthony stared at the ceiling, wondering if he'd crossed a line, if the kiss had been a mistake, if Ezra would still want him around after this. Ezra clutched the edge of the blanket, still feeling the press of Anthony's lips on his own. He hadn't expected it to feel like that. Like the kiss had carved a crack down the middle of him, and now everything else had to shift to make room. He turned slightly, just enough to glimpse Anthony's back, the way his shoulder blades moved with every breath, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He wanted to reach out. He didn't. Neither of them said goodnight. Neither of them needed to. The kiss still lingered between them. Heavy. Real. And for the first time, the pact didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a door they'd just opened. Chapter 4. The pact was a joke. So why does this hurt so much? The countryside estate looked like it had been plucked from the pages of an overpriced lifestyle magazine. Rolling green hills, ivy-wrapped stone buildings, horse-drawn carriages, and a lake so still it reflected the blush-colored sky like a dream. Everything about it screamed romance. Everything about it made Anthony want to crawl back into the Jeep and drive the hell away. Ezra was unusually quiet as they checked into their suite. One bed, of course. Again. The tension between them hadn't faded since the rooftop kiss. If anything, the long car ride here had made it worse. Every sideways glance, every graze of fingers when they reached for the same water bottle, every almost word left hanging, it all built into a slow, burning pressure neither of them knew how to release. They stood on opposite sides of the room like wary animals, pretending to unpack, pretending they hadn't been stuck in the same unspoken question since last weekend. What does this mean now? Anthony pulled out his tie and stared at it like it might offer answers. We should head to the welcome dinner soon. You good? Ezra didn't look up. Yeah, great. His voice was clipped, polite, wrong. Anthony nodded, trying to ignore the way his chest tightened. Cool. They arrived at the garden terrace just in time for cocktail hour. String lights crisscrossed overhead, casting golden patterns on stone walkways. Guests mingled with tiny glasses of lavender gin and citrus spritzes, laughter floating through the air like confetti. Anthony was halfway through a pleasant enough conversation with the groom's cousin when he heard a voice behind him. Anthony? He turned and nearly dropped his drink. Standing there in a crisp beige blazer and too familiar smile was Julian, his ex, warm hazel eyes. Still wavy dark blonde hair. Still the same quiet charm that once made Anthony think they'd be forever. And on Julian's hand, a ring. New, gleaming. I didn't know you were coming, Julian said, eyes flicking toward Ezra, who was currently arranging flower stems by the bar. You look good. Anthony cleared his throat. You too. And congrats, I heard you got engaged. Julian smiled, soft and a little sheepish. Yeah, about 2 months ago he proposed after karaoke night, completely off-key. Anthony laughed despite himself. Sounds perfect. It is, Julian tilted his head. You happy? Anthony hesitated just long enough. Julian noticed. I'm working on it, Anthony said, then added, That's Ezra, by the way. Julian followed his gaze. He's the one you made the pact with, right? The +1 thing? Anthony blinked. How do you? You posted a photo of him fixing your tie last month, Julian said gently. I might have looked. Anthony glanced away. It's complicated. Julian gave a knowing smile. Of course it is. The best things usually are. Before Anthony could respond, he felt something shift. He turned and caught Ezra looking at them. Not smiling, not joking, just watching, his face unreadable. Then Ezra walked away. Shit! Anthony found him hours later, wandering the edge of the garden with a drink in hand and a forced grin on his face. But he wasn't alone. A man in a linen suit stood far too close, brushing a hand along Ezra's arm, speaking low in his ear. Anthony didn't recognize him immediately, but the moment Ezra stiffened, he knew. Rafa. Ezra's ex. The charming one. The manipulative one. The one who made Ezra stop trusting people who promised to stay. Rafa smiled like a man who still thought he had a chance. Ezra wasn't smiling. Anthony didn't think. He just moved. Hey, he said, inserting himself between them with the kind of casual aggression only fueled by jealousy and months of denial. Everything okay here? Rafa raised an eyebrow. And you are? I'm with him. Ezra flinched. just barely. But Anthony saw it. Rafa, unbothered, gave a lazy smile. Funny, last time I checked, Ezra didn't like people speaking for him. Anthony's hands clenched at his sides. Last time I checked, Ezra doesn't owe you a damn conversation. Guys, Ezra said, voice tight. It's fine. No, it's not, Anthony snapped. You shouldn't have to stand here and pretend you're okay with this. Ezra stepped back. Anthony, you always do this, Anthony went on too loud now. You let people get close and then pretend it doesn't matter, that it's easier to smile and nod and let them take what they want than actually say what you need. Ezra's face darkened. Says the man who kisses me one night and then acts like we're still just some joke pact the next. Anthony's heart stuttered. Rafa had wisely disappeared. But Ezra wasn't done. You want to be my protector now? You don't get to play hero when you've spent weeks acting like none of this means anything. It does mean something, Anthony said, raw. Then why are you so damn scared of saying it? Ezra's voice cracked. We keep showing up for weddings, Anthony. When are we going to start showing up for us? Silence. The kind that made your bones ache. Ezra shook his head and walked off. Anthony didn't follow. Not at first. It took him 20 minutes and 2 wrong turns before he found Ezra sitting on a wooden bench along a forest path behind the estate. The trees loomed tall, their leaves whispering secrets in the dark. Lanterns dotted the trail like fireflies. Ezra didn't look up when Anthony approached. You were laughing with him, Ezra said quietly. Your ex. I was being polite. You were smiling. I've smiled with you. Ezra looked at him then, eyes too bright in the moonlight. It didn't feel like it meant the same thing. Anthony sat beside him, not touching, just breathing the same air. You think I want Julian? I think you don't know what you want. That's not fair. No, Ezra said, voice trembling. What's not fair is feeling something every time you touch me, and not knowing if you'll still look at me the same way tomorrow. What's not fair is kissing you and then wondering if I imagined it. Anthony ran a hand down his face. I thought if I didn't name it, I wouldn't lose it. Ezra stared ahead. Too late, the silence stretched again. Then Anthony, barely audible, said, I want this. You, not the pact, not the fake +1 crap. You. But I didn't know how to say it without ruining everything. Ezra finally met his eyes. I don't want to be a placeholder for something real, he whispered. You're not. Then stop treating me like one. Anthony opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That night, they didn't share the bed. Ezra curled up on the couch with a blanket and earbuds. Anthony lay in the bed alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering when pretending stopped being the safe choice and started being the thing that broke them. Chapter 5, I didn't want a +1. I wanted you. The text came through just before sunrise. We're eloping. Courthouse. Noon. I want you to walk me down the hallway. Please don't make me do this without you. Anthony blinked against the light of his phone screen, groggy and still sprawled across the hotel bed, alone. Ezra hadn't come back last night. His side of the bed remained untouched, a cold reminder of the fight that had left more than just silence between them. He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. His heart ached with the weight of everything unsaid, of every moment they'd stood too close but didn't speak. But when it came to his sister, Lara, there was no question. He would show up. Still, when he stood at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over her message, it wasn't her name he dialed. It was Ezra's. It rang once. Twice. A third time. Then, miraculously, hello? Ezra's voice was thick with sleep, confused. Anthony? Anthony hesitated. Lara's getting married. Like, today. Courthouse, not a production. She asked me to walk her down the hallway. Ezra was quiet for a second. You're calling to tell me that, or... I don't want to go without you. The line buzzed with stillness. Then, text me the address. Anthony closed his eyes, exhaling. The courthouse was tucked between 2 office buildings and looked nothing like a place where people celebrated love. The hallway leading to the judge's office was narrow, lit by cheap fluorescents, and smelled faintly of old paper and lemon floor polish. But when Lara walked in wearing a white jumpsuit and holding the hand of her fiancé, Madison, the space transformed. Not with decorations or music, but with emotion. Pure, raw, undeniable emotion. Anthony stood tall in a crisp navy suit, heart swelling as his baby sister beamed at him. She clutched his arm, nervous energy bouncing in her step. You sure about this? He whispered. Lara rolled her eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. He smiled. Good. I'd hate to have to tackle anyone on your behalf. She smirked. You wouldn't make it 5 feet in those shoes. Anthony glanced up, and his breath caught. Ezra was standing at the end of the hall. He wore a soft gray button-down, sleeves rolled up, and black slacks. No flowers, no accessories, just him. Hands tucked in his pockets, curls loosely tied back. But his eyes were fixed on Anthony. Anthony walked Lara forward slowly, the steps feeling strangely ceremonial, even here. As he passed Ezra, something shifted. Their fingers brushed. It was barely more than a graze, but it held 1,000 words. And Ezra's eyes were glassy. The ceremony was brief but perfect. Lara and Madison exchanged whispered vows, the judge choked up, and Anthony held back tears with every fiber of his being. Not because it was sad, but because it was good. Real, whole. Ezra stood near the door the entire time, silently watching Anthony's face. After the signatures were inked and the rings exchanged, Lara threw her arms around her brother. Thank you for being here. Anthony hugged her tightly. Always. She pulled back and whispered in his ear, and thank you for bringing him. Back at the hotel, everything felt delicate. They hadn't talked yet. Not really. But Ezra had come. They stepped into the suite, the door clicking shut behind them. No wedding guests, no dancing, no noise. Just them. Anthony tossed his blazer on the couch and turned to Ezra, who hovered in the middle of the room like he didn't know what to do with himself. I'm sorry, Anthony said, voice low. Ezra's lips parted, but no words came. Anthony took a step closer, about the fight, about how I said things, or didn't say things. Ezra shook his head slowly. I'm not mad anymore. You should have been. Ezra's throat worked, like he was trying to swallow something sharp. You know what scared me the most? Anthony waited. Ezra's voice was barely above a whisper. Wanting this. Wanting you. Not because it's easy or safe, but because it's real. Because I've never wanted someone who actually wanted me back. Anthony stared at him, stunned. Ezra stepped forward, chest rising. I didn't want a +1, Anthony. I wanted you. It shattered something inside him. Anthony surged forward before he could think better of it, cupping Ezra's face in both hands and kissing him like the world had been waiting for them to catch up. Ezra melted into it, hands gripping Anthony's waist, their bodies pressing together like two puzzle pieces finally aligned. The kiss was slower this time. Less like a spark and more like warmth flooding in after a long, cold night. It deepened gradually, lips parting, breaths shared, hearts thudding in synchrony. When they pulled away, Anthony rested his forehead against Ezra's. I didn't think I was allowed to hope, he said softly. Not until you. Ezra smiled through his tears. Then I guess we're both late to our own party. Their clothes came off between kisses and soft laughter, like a dance they'd rehearsed in every stolen glance, every quiet night where their fingers had almost lingered. There was no urgency, only reverence. Anthony traced every inch of Ezra's skin like he was memorizing it. Ezra whispered Anthony's name like it was a prayer. They made love in the muted light of the hotel room with no music but the rustle of sheets and the sound of gasped affection. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And afterward, they lay tangled together, bare skin against bare skin, sharing pillow breath and sleepy kisses. Ezra ran a hand down Anthony's chest, smiling. You snore. I do not. You do. Softly, like an apologetic pug, Anthony groaned. We just had the most intimate night of our lives, and this is what you focus on? Ezra kissed his shoulder. I like pugs. The next morning, Anthony woke to the smell of something suspicious. He stumbled into the kitchenette to find Ezra, shirtless, wearing one of Anthony's 2 large t-shirts that hung past his hips, trying to operate the hotel's coffee machine. You're about to commit a federal crime against caffeine, Anthony said, leaning in the doorway. Ezra turned sheepish. I thought I could surprise you. I'm definitely surprised. Ezra handed him a cup. It tasted like betrayal. Anthony grimaced. This is hot bean water's bitter cousin. Ezra pouted. You wound me. Anthony walked over and kissed the corner of his mouth. I'll make the next round. You just stand there and look pretty in my shirt. Ezra beamed. So we're officially that couple now? Anthony smirked. Basically married. Guess we should start RSVPing together. Anthony took his hand. No more pretending. No more pretending, Ezra echoed, squeezing his fingers. And in that small hotel kitchenette, with bad coffee and warm smiles, something permanent clicked into place. They hadn't just made a pact. They'd made something real. Chapter 6. Last wedding of the season. First day of forever. The Tuscan air was warm and fragrant, heavy with the scent of ripe grapes and wild lavender that climbed the low stone walls framing the sprawling vineyard. Rows upon rows of golden hills rolled beneath a sky too blue to be real, dotted with wispy clouds like soft brushstrokes. It was the kind of place that didn't just host weddings, it cradled them in magic. Ezra stood barefoot in the grass, hands deep in a crate of florals, pinning soft white blooms into a sculptural archway near the cliffside terrace. His curls were tied back in a loose knot, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, his maroon linen shirt rolled to the elbows and half unbuttoned, exposing a tan collarbone and a sun-kissed line of freckles. Anthony had spent the past few days quietly admiring every morning. Anthony leaned against a nearby column, arms crossed, watching Ezra work like he always did when he thought Ezra wouldn't notice. Half in awe, half in love. Except now, there was no pretending otherwise. They'd flown into Florence 2 days ago, laughing the entire car ride through the hills as they raced scooters, got lost in alleyways with too much gelato, and kissed behind quiet cafes while pretending they weren't a walking cliché. Everyone at the wedding assumed they were a couple. They didn't correct them. Anthony had even overheard the bride whisper to her sister, "You can just tell when people are soulmates." He didn't argue with that either. He had a speech to finish for the groom, his college roommate, Matteo, but at the moment, all he could think about was Ezra's hands. The way they moved through roses and olive branches like they were sculpting emotion out of color. The way they'd moved over him just a few nights ago, whispering promises into skin instead of words. "Stop staring at me like you're going to devour me," Ezra said without turning around, his voice playful. "I will neither confirm nor deny," Anthony replied. Ezra finally turned, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Get over here and help with the ribbon." Anthony crossed the grass, took the satin spool from Ezra's outstretched hand, and leaned in too close on purpose. "This counts as our contribution to the wedding, right?" Ezra pressed a kiss to his cheek. "You're giving the speech. I'm giving people mild floral-induced allergies. We're the perfect team." Later, after the ceremony, short and full of tears and vows that made even the grumpy uncle cry, they wandered through the vineyard hand in hand. It felt like something out of a fairy tale, or at least an extremely well-funded indie romance. They stole kisses behind wooden barrels, fed each other chunks of bread dipped in olive oil, and played tag through the vines until Anthony tripped over a loose rock and fell into Ezra, both of them laughing so hard they nearly choked on wine. When they found a hammock strung between 2 trees near the edge of the hill, they collapsed into it together, limbs tangled, hearts full. Ezra lay with his head on Anthony's chest, tracing lazy circles into the fabric of his shirt. "I could stay here forever," Ezra murmured. "You say that now," Anthony said. "Wait until the mosquitoes show up." Ezra shifted up slightly to kiss his chin. "Then I'll let you be my human bug net." Anthony grinned and tightened his arm around him. "That's true love." By the time the reception began, the sky had gone gold. The terrace twinkled with candles in mason jars, and soft jazz played under the string lights. Everyone looked a little too beautiful under that Tuscan glow. Anthony straightened his tie, nerves simmering under his skin as he stood beside the mic. Ezra, seated near the head table in a wine-colored blazer and no tie, lifted his glass in silent encouragement. Anthony cleared his throat. "Hi, I'm Anthony, Matteo's college roommate, designated snacker, and lifelong bad influence," he began, earning a few polite laughs. "I had a speech prepared. It was full of metaphors and long-winded stories about late-night ramen and failed attempts at dating apps." He paused. "But I kept rewriting it, because something changed this year." The crowd stilled. "This year, I stopped showing up to weddings alone, and it wasn't the pact that changed things, it was the person I made it with." He glanced toward Ezra, whose eyes were wide, lips slightly parted. "I used to think love had to be fireworks, big, loud, explosive, but then it turned out it was Ezra making me coffee in the mornings, horribly, I should add, and pretending it wasn't terrible. It was him remembering my favorite pastry, letting me steal the hotel pillow, being quiet with me when I didn't want to talk and loud when I needed to laugh. Anthony exhaled, heart pounding. Ezra showed up, and kept showing up. And it turns out, love doesn't have to be some dramatic movie. Sometimes it's just knowing that someone will be at your side table after table, wedding after wedding, even when you're not brave enough to say what you feel. He looked at Ezra directly. So here it is. I'm saying it now. The crowd let out a collective breath. Ezra stood slowly, and before anyone could react, he crossed the floor, took Anthony's face in both hands, and pulled him into a kiss. The guests erupted. Some whistled, some clapped. One grandma cried. Anthony kissed him back, deeply, laughing into Ezra's mouth. You timed that well. I've been waiting all year. That night, back at their villa, the windows were thrown open to let in the summer breeze, and the terrace was lit by candle stubs and stars. The air was warm, rich with the scent of the vineyard, and the only sound was the low hum of crickets and Ezra's laughter echoing through the vines. They toasted with local wine, barefoot and tipsy, dancing slowly on the cobblestones as if the whole world had narrowed to just them. Ezra leaned into Anthony's shoulder and whispered, Think they'll mind if we bring our own cake topper to the next one? Anthony brushed a kiss over his temple. Only if it's not us. Ezra tilted his head back, eyes gleaming. We're disgustingly sweet right now. You love it? I do. They danced in slow circles, soft and swaying, the kind of movement that didn't need rhythm, just closeness. Later, curled together under a shared blanket on the terrace, Ezra looked up at the sky and murmured, You know what the best part is? What? This was supposed to be the end of the season. Anthony turned to look at him. And now? Ezra grinned. Feels more like a beginning. Anthony kissed him gently. We didn't just fall in love, Ezra finished for him, voice soft and sure. We RSVP'd to forever.